Hello everybody, this is Dasmatech, and today I will be teaching you how to make this water sphere in Blender 2.82. Alright, now without further ado, let's hop into doing this fluid simulation. First, we're going to click General, and then we are going to do delete everything. Now we are going to make a cube as our domain, and scale that up a bunch. Now, we are going to press Z, go to wireframe mode, and Shift A, do a UV sphere. We are going to scale this up as well, and if you go to side view mode, we just want it slightly less than the domain. Now, we want to go to this sphere, add modifier, and click solidify. Now, what we are going to do is we need the thickness to be really big. For some odd reason, fluid simulations don't work inside objects unless you have a really thick border. So, if you want to have a, let's say a glass ball around this water, then all you would have to do is you would have to do a new UV sphere and have it as glass. But we are not going to do that in this video. So we have a pretty big thickness. We can change it to 0.25 depending on your size of the sphere, but it needs to be roughly this size between the two spheres that it creates. We're going to press apply now. And now, so we have the domain and the obstacle. So what we're going to do is we're going to add mesh, and you can choose whatever mesh you want to do. I'm going to do a sphere, and then we are going to scale it up a bit, G, Z, and there we are. We're set up now. All right, so now that we're set up, we can add all of the fluid domain properties. So we're going to select the domain object, and first let's name this. So domain. We can name this the obstacle, and we can name this the inflow. All right, so let's click on the domain, tap fluid in the simulations tab, and then we are going to go to new domain. Now make sure you change this to liquid because we are doing a liquid simulation right now. We're gonna leave this and come back to it later. Let's go to the inflow, fluid, and then flow. Now make sure you change this to liquid, and depending on what you want to do, we're going to do geometry in this, but you can look at some other videos on how to do inflow. And we do not need any initial velocity or any flow source, so that is done. Now we go to the obstacle, fluid, type effector, collision, and then that is all we need to do. Now we can go to the domain, and we can see that the resolution divisions is basically the resolution of the water that you will do. The more, the higher resolution, but it also takes more time to bake your data. The time scale, normally I would put this at 0.5 because water simulations, for some reason in Blender, go pretty fast. The CFL number we don't need to touch. Time steps, maximum and minimum. The higher you go, it basically uses it to blend frames so that the simulation looks better. Flip ratio, we can leave the same, although more basically means more splashes, less basically means the water has less splashes. We do not need to touch any of this. Particle randomness, I think I'm going to put it at 0.5. And then narrow bandwidth is at 6. So there we go. And then mesh, we are going to click mesh. Upres factor, we'll just see how many particles we have in here. You might want to put it at 3, but it's sort of an exponent to this factor right here, so it takes a lot more time to bake depending on what you want. And then we'll do particles spray, foam, and bubbles. And we'll see what the up-res factor we want to do later. And normally with this, I just leave all the settings the same. All right, so now let's bake our data for the settings. All right, so as you can see, just make sure that you can see particles right here. They should be blue. Blue is the color is the velocity. Blue is the least velocity. Red is the most velocity. So actually, we're going to free these particles because I forgot to do something. Go down into cache, and we have to change the end of this simulation. I believe in the simulation that I already did, the end was 150. So we're going to do that. And then we also want to go to a separate cache file. Okay, so now that we have a cache file set up for the output of these, we can bake the data fully. So I'll see you once the bake is finished. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake the mesh right after I show you what the render looks like. Now, keep in mind that since it is trying to render out a ton of particles, it will be a bit laggy. So the normal speed of a video is 24 frames a second, and it seems like it is running up here at 3.1 frames per second. But as you can see, this is a nice way to preview what the domain looks like. And while I was gone, I also changed the up-res factor on the main settings to 80 instead of 64, just so that I can have that be my final render setting. So now, what I'm gonna do is I have that baked, and remember, you have to bake these settings before you can bake the mesh or the particles. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to pause this, actually. And then, so settings, and then now I'm gonna bake the mesh and the particles, and I will see you once they are all baked. All right, so now that we have our baking done, we can see the simulation. So right now we can see it is going to be laggy, like I said last time. So you can see it goes. And the red stuff are the foam, spray, and splash particles. And the black is the actual water. So if we actually press pause and go into, well, we have to actually go up to this, click the disable in viewports, and also disable in renders view, and we are going to disable the obstacle object and the inflow object for each of those. So now we can only see the water. So now if we go into normal mode, we can see the water, and as you can see, so the particles now are the particles, and the mesh is the water. And as you can see, the water animates. I'm not going to play the whole thing through because that would probably take a while. The final thing that we need to do before we render this out is we need to do a new mesh icosphere and make sure to don't move it yet or click away from it. Make sure that you click the add icosphere down in the bottom left and turn the subdivisions to 1 or to the least amount possible. Then you can click away, and this icosphere we will move away. Now we're going to scale this down. So these icospheres are going to be the water particles and need to be pretty small. So we're going to do Control A. We are going to apply scale. So now the scale is applied, so that is good. And what we're going to do is we are going to go into edit mode and we're just going to move it around a bit. So this makes it so that the particles aren't as grid-like as over here. You might be able to see it. 1 second. So if you go over here, you can see that the particles look like they're in a grid. So if you put the center point for an object in a different place, then you will be able to go to that center object and make it less grid-like. So then we'll just do Shift D, X, and then we'll scale it up and tab into edit mode and move it to a different spot this time. And then Shift D, G, X, and we'll scale it up a bit more. And then we will tab into edit mode and move it to a different position. So that makes it a bit random. And then we want 3 particles. So we're going to do a new collection in here. Do spray and foam. Capitalize foam. Sorry. So that's spray and foam. And then we are going to duplicate the collection, and this will be bubbles. So now we can actually select these two and GX, so that's a different collection. So the bubbles are going to be a different texture than the spray and foam. The spray and foam is going to be more of a white texture, and the bubbles are going to be more of like a clear texture. So now that we have all this, I'm going to disable the domain in the viewport so that it's less laggy, and then we will work on the textures for these objects. So let's go into the shading tab up here, and we will do in the rendered viewport, make sure to turn it to cycles. That's important for this render. If you have a GPU, turn it to GPU compute. If not, then CPU is fine. Though if you do have a GPU, then it is much faster. We are going to turn up the viewport display all the way to white so that we can see these particles better. And now, so this is the bubbles. These are the bubbles that we have selected. So we'll do a new material. I will do bubbles is the name of the material. Delete the BSDF and do a new glass. And so we'll have the glass. The IQR will be 1.3333 and the roughness will be 0. And that is all we need to do for that texture. So we will do we will select bubble and bubble. So that is the new one. We might want to actually make it so that the color is slightly down. So yeah, that looks good. And then over here, we'll do a new material, and this will be spray. And we will delete this, do a new glass, and hook that up. This will be 1.3333, and I actually forgot to add something to the bubbles, so we'll do that in a bit. We'll turn all of these to spray, and then over in the bubble tab, we need to also add a transparent BSDF and a mix shader. So if we drag it onto there, and then that will be right here. So now we can see that. And then the transparent will have the factor a bit down. So those are our particles now. Let me bring this a bit up. So those are our particles, and now we will do the domain. So enable this in the viewport, And what we're going to do for the time being is, we need the domain. We're going to disable spray, foam, and bubbles, just so that it's less laggy. So now with the shading, we can go back. This is the water, and we will do a new. And then this will be a glass shader. And then we will make this slightly blue. Important part, go into film and press transparent glass, which will make the water look a bit more realistic. So now, that is all we have to do. So that is, those are the textures that we just did. Now with the domain, we go to the particles. We can enable spray, foam, and bubbles. Now if we click on one of them, we can do render as collection. So bubbles, we will do bubbles, and make sure to pick random from the collection. And now with foam, we will do render as a collection, pick spray and foam, and pick random. And finally, spray, render as collection, choose spray and foam, and pick random. So now, as you can see, it is rendering so that those particles are there. So now, this is the final thing that we have to do. Other than the render settings, we are going to add a camera back here, and Control-Alt number pad 0 to lock the camera to your view. And then go over to here, view, lock camera to view, so you can get a nice position for this. And I'm going to click to maybe frame 70 of the simulation just to see that the whole entire bubble is within the frame of the camera. So now I'm going to make sure that the particles are out of the view of the camera. So that seems like a good position right there. So now, all I have to do is go over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to have the render at 40 samples. We need to go to light paths, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. The direct light will be 1, indirect light 1, and then we want to turn on, we want to go over here, pick the output folder. So I'm going to pick that, and then I will set it as an FFmpeg video, but you can set it as anything you want to. We will do H.264 instead of Matroxka MPEG 4, and then we will do perceptually lossless, and I believe that is all set up now. Yes, it is. So we can do a render image just to see how it will look like. And now make sure to enable this, enable the particles here. And now we can render our animation. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.